Welcome to The Ripple, where extraordinary women executives share their turning points, growing pains, breakthroughs, and triumphs to help you show up with confidence. I'm your host, Ashley Lobbs, and today we're joined by the ever evolving Abi Williams, founder of Lead Not Lag and author of 10 Traits of Great Leadership That Are Often Overlooked. She's a fractional CRO who specializes in go to market and revenue development with a 20-year history that includes companies like Oracle, Meta, LinkedIn, Pluralsight, and more. Today, she joins us to talk about the breaking of generational leadership cycles. Abby, thank you so much for joining us today. It is such a pleasure to chat with you.
Great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, I'd love to start by hearing a little bit about your work and just what you love about what you're doing.
What's there not to love, right? The opportunity to help leaders, CEOs, businesses drive growth in a people centric way. I've been in this space for about 20 years and I find that a lot of leaders have been taught wrong. And basically, they're just doing what they've learned since 1927 the way their boss taught them to lead, and they just literally did the same thing. And we're just getting that cycle again and again and again. And examples of that is like, spreadsheet leadership or leadership where you don't realize that the people make the business win. If your employees are led right, if your customers are happy, the business will come. And I've proven this again and again in several companies to show how you can actually grow revenues while your people are happy, they're motivated, they're invested in, and your customers are forefront of your strategy.
I
But
love
I just think
that.
it's a secret that a lot of people just don't realize, right? They don't put the employee first and they don't put their customer success first. And they're expecting magic. So yeah, that's why I love the opportunity to help do that. And of course, as a result of that, other future leaders are going to be learning the right way to lead a business, to grow revenues, to do sales in a people centric way.
It's so important that we're bringing those ideas together. And I was really struck by the phrase spreadsheet leadership. I'd love to dive into that for a second and talk about why you think that's become this leadership habit that we're repeating over and over through generations of leaders.
Because people are not learning. And that goes to one of my habits that I'll talk to you about later. But I feel like usually, once people get to a certain level, in the earliest careers, people are learning because they're aspiring to get to a certain level of leadership. But once they
Hmm.
get there, they stop learning. They stop trying to develop themselves. They just kind of do what they've always done and
Hmm.
expect a different result. That's really the key of it, right? It's kind of like, even in a marriage, even in a relationship, it's important that you keep learning and really mastering your craft. How am I doing? How can I be better? How can I be better as a leader? And that takes a sense of humility, right? To know that it's not a static place. It's a place that's dynamic, that should get better and better and better. And I just think the reason is they're just like, I'm a manager now. I'm a CEO now, so I don't need to learn anything because I know everything. So I'm just going to pass down what I've always done and always know.
Which is ironic because I think when you first come into a place of leadership, you know the least about how to be a leader. You know the most about how to be a contributor. So that makes a lot of sense to me. And I'm curious to dig into this idea of spreadsheet leadership. What does that look like? Like, what are the symptoms of spreadsheet leadership? How do you know that's something you're perpetuating?
So I'll give you a story. I remember when back years ago, when I was in a team of when I was in sales, when I was an individual contributor, and I had this leader, or this, she called him a manager, really, he wasn't a leader. But I had this manager who would look at the dashboard and use that to determine who were the strongest in his team. And that was so flawed because the
Mm,
strongest in the team are not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily always show up in the numbers immediately. It should over time, right? Over time, consistency, you should see your top performance consistently perform. But it's not always the case, right? So if you're not focused on the process, if you're not focused on coaching, if you're not focused on peeling the onions to actually see what are your people doing, how are they actually doing what they're doing, to really identify where the gaps are, where the strengths are, you have the wrong picture. If you just focus looking at the numbers, looking at the dashboards, looking at the spreadsheets, And then also you miss the opportunity to capitalize on great skills and great competencies. And then you miss the opportunity for coaching.
That's so powerful, and it makes me think of a lesson that I learned early in my marketing career, which is that data doesn't actually give you answers, it only gives you hypotheses, right? You can see how the numbers are going up or down, but you actually have to form a hypothesis about why that's happening and test it out, and I
Exactly.
think that's the same with your team as it is with your marketing.
Absolutely. And there's a bit of laziness in there as well, because it's easy for me to look at the data and just answer my questions and just draw conclusions, right? Because
Yeah.
when you have to go to the people and understand the process and actually get involved in the front line, it takes work, right?
Yeah.
To really confirm that data, find out what's happening with your customers. Is it aligned with the data? Find out what is the current process right now. Data is data, right? But it needs to be holistic. You need to go into the weeds. And that's the extra piece that a lot of leaders don't want to do. You need to go understand, ask questions of your teams, of your customers, look at where the opportunity to enhance. Does this reflect the data or not? It's not gospel, right? It's a KPI, a part of the story, but it's important to get other part of the story. And that means being involved. And you find that a lot of leaders, sadly, just want to sit on their chair and give orders. They want to sit on their chair and make decisions from spreadsheets. A lot of them don't really want to go hands on and get involved in the front line and get involved in the lead and actually sit for the holistic story in order to make an informed decision.
That's so interesting to me because we become leaders. Nobody's a leader out of thin air. They were a contributor, they worked their way up usually.
Mhm.
And we all want those managers and those leaders who are paying attention and working with us and seeing what's going on and making it better. Why do you think that shifts when somebody becomes a leader?
Because you have to remember that what you just painted is the ideal situation where people have become a leader because maybe they earned the position, they showed the competencies of a leader and so on and so forth. But in reality, that's actually not the case. I've worked in an organization whereby people get promoted either because they had a great relationship or maybe they were a top performer. Like even in the sales industry, I always say to leaders that the top performer doesn't necessarily mean they should be a leader of people, because for
Yeah.
me, the traits of leadership is, somebody that's actually interested in how the team data actually shows that most top performers don't necessarily make great leaders because they're used to being an individual and driving performance in an individual way. And it takes a different mindset, right? Because now it's about driving performance through people. So, firstly, people just get made a manager. There's no
Mm,
investment into how to actually be a manager. A lot of people are not taught. They were just promoted to be a manager because they were a great individual. And then that spiral just starts and continues. So for me, the issue is down to the foundation of how we're actually picking leaders and how we're developing them from ground up. This is why I'm really passionate about, you know, I do a lot of work with current leaders, right? Who've been CEOs for like the last 30 years and so on and so forth. And, I was saying the other day that it's quite hard to drive impact there because these people have developed the culture of how they are for
mhm.
over 30 years or so on. And it's hard to deculture that. Except maybe the person is totally like growth minded and really wants to change and develop and so on. But most of the time, it's like you can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? So that's why my work, while I work with really established leaders in industry, I do put a lot of time to up and coming ones because they're hungry, they're fresh, they're more coachable, they're more humble to grasp what excellence looks like versus the one that has been, I've done it this way for the last 30, 40 years. It's a little bit slower.
I have to imagine that a business like yours grows out of having that experience yourself, right? Did you feel like when you stepped into management and leadership that you were just kind of given the same old playbook and that you were kind of asked to just be a spreadsheet leader? Did you have to form your own rituals or habits around that?
Absolutely. It's like, all right, you're amazing. You become a manager, go figure. You get a target and that's it, right? And this is where, I have a ritual of self development. I'm constantly looking at, okay, even if I don't have a direct leader who I can learn from. How can I learn from people around me? How can I learn from those that have gone ahead and shown what excellence looks like, right? And that's why, your ethics has to drive you. Because for me,
Mm.
I'm very purpose driven and I truly believe that leadership, being a leader, being a CEO, being a CRO, you can be kind. You can give concrete feedback in a way that is kind. You can lead revenues and drive huge numbers, huge year on year growth in a people centric way where your people know that you care about them. You can run businesses while people are growing and improving and you're intentionally invested in them as an individual and in their career. All of that is possible. And I've proven that again and again and again. So I had to figure it out because a lot of people around me didn't play that way. Right. And for me, it was like, hold on a minute. Why is this not a thing? This
Yeah.
is possible. So I was really, really passionate about proving that it's possible. And I have. And, times that I've done that, my team were the most engaged team from our employee voice survey. The team that I ran were blowing out their numbers and they were really, really engaged and we're driving a culture that is about learning together and sharing and growing together and customer first and employee well-being, which is critical too to success. But sadly, a lot of people feel like, oh, the soft stuff,
It
not
feels
really
so
important.
soft, but it's interesting to me that we've really started paying attention to employee engagement and employee well-being since the pandemic, right? And those are such important metrics because it's very, just from a purely business perspective, it's very expensive for
Mhm.
companies to be constantly churning through people. And it's such a sign that a productivity first mindset or like a spreadsheet first, a number first mindset really isn't
Mhm.
the end of the story because you've got a big hole in your bucket if you're not actually able to keep people there. So these quote soft metrics of engagement and well-being, they seem so essential to achieving the numbers that we traditionally want.
Critical. It's the most important thing because who's going to bring those numbers? People. And when your employees are whole, when I say whole, when you manage your employees holistically. So, for example, I can't do my best work if mentally I'm not healthy, if my family is not healthy,
Yeah.
if I'm not physically healthy, I'm not going to bring my best work to the business. If I'm not motivated or I don't feel connected or I'm not connected to the mission or the vision of the company and what I'm doing and I feel like a number, I'm not going to do my best work. So
Right. Well,
therefore it's kind of crazy.
none of us wanna feel like we are being treated like machines, and I think the
Exactly.
reality is a lot of the time we're treated worse, because if a company had a, $200,000 piece of equipment, they would do the regular maintenance on it. They wouldn't just wear it into the ground,
Yeah.
right? They would know that to get the optimal performance out of the machine, they have to have someone come in and work with it and tune it up, and they need to be paying
Hmm.
attention to it. They can't just run
Hmm.
it into the ground. But when we talk about people, right? And I've always personally hated the term human resources because it makes us sound like a machine. But
Hmm.
even if we're just going to compare the thing that we don't want to be, right? Machines can sometimes get treated better than employees because employees they're getting paid for their time, but that's like paying for the equipment in the first place, right? That's not
Yeah.
actually the routine maintenance that we need to perform our best. That's not training, that's not support, that's not flexibility and benefits
Hmm.
and well-being and all of those things that it takes for us to perform our
Yeah.
best.
Yeah.
So, it's so strange to think about that it took the pandemic and kind of all this remote and hybrid work for us to really start thinking about these things in a different way.
Well, has that really changed? Because you have to remember that a lot of people are not led by leaders that actually care about these things because they haven't had leaders that has shown them how this is possible, right? So for me as a leader, anybody that has come under me or worked with me has seen that it is possible to
Mhm.
do all of these things. So my hope is that they will go and be future leaders and be leaders in that way, right? And follow suit in terms of what good looks like, right? Which is
Yeah.
managing the whole employee in order to drive business results because that matters. That's how it actually works, right? But most of our leaders today have never been shown the way. They don't know that that's possible. They don't think it's important. They talk about it, but they're not really about it. which is just the sad cycle of most of the leadership on seat today.
You're so right. And when I think about a lot of the leaders that I've talked to, a lot of them would agree. They want to retain employees, they want to engage employees, even if it doesn't feel like they care about it in the way that they're actually going forward with their work. I think there's this thing that
Hmm.
gets lost in translation where you talk about these ideas in theory or in abstract and they're totally on board with you. But then in
Hmm.
everyday practice,
In reality.
there's a disconnect, and so I'm
Hmm.
curious as we talk about breaking the cycles of generations of leadership that are driven by spreadsheets, by the numbers, what are some tangible habits that you would recommend leaders explore if they want to bridge that disconnect and bring more of that person-centered leadership into their everyday work?
So, number one, I would say is that self development. Because if you're a leader, you come from a place of, I am becoming. I need to get better and better every day. And as humans, we should all be like that. So, for example, as a friend, you should be a better friend as you are compared to last year. You should be a better friend this year. As a mother, there's so many things that you can learn to help you be a better mother. Same with a father. So many things that you should be learning to help you be a better father. Humans tend to do that and feel personal, but at work, it's the same thing, right? If you're a manager, if you're a CEO, there's certain things that you should be learning and gaining mastery over your role, right? You should be learning how to be a better employee. You should be learning how to run better board meetings. You should be learning how to run better company all hands meetings. You should be learning how to drive your team better, how to listen better in one on one. So it comes down to that mindset of, do you have a learning and a becoming mindset?
Mm,
And it goes back to my point in the beginning that a lot of people don't because they've stopped learning. That's how I define death. It's when you stop learning, you're just dead because you're not improving. And the thing is, who we are is what we're gonna give. And what I mean by that is the better I am as a leader, the better my team will be. The better I am, the richer I am in terms of my personality, the better my kids will be, the better I will be as a mother, right? So it comes down to that mindset and that place of humility to know that just because you're a CEO, just because I'm a CRO, doesn't mean that I know everything.
yeah.
That learning has to be continuously, daily, asking for feedback. Hey, that situation, assessing yourself. I could have been better. Maybe I could have handled that. I could have reacted in this way or in a more efficient way and so on. And just really coming to that place of knowing that you can be a better version of yourself in your role
Yeah.
at home, professionally, personally.
I think what's really interesting about your analogy of death, it seems so intense at first glance, but that's a natural cycle, life and death. And thinking about this in natural cycles is actually really interesting because I think when we talk about personal growth and growth in abstract in the context of business, it can just feel like more, more, more. And we all have a finite amount of time, energy, willpower, and so we can't always be doing more. But I think what's interesting in thinking about life and death, even just thinking about like a plant's growth, is that
Yeah.
as a plant is growing, it's not just that it's more, it's that it's constantly unfolding, right?
Yes,
And you're discovering things. There is a newness
exactly.
as it grows. And
Exactly.
when that growth stops, when it has reached its peak, what happens after that, right? It starts to deteriorate. And
Exactly.
we have such a gift as humans to keep growing. And of course, we're all biologically aging and going through that process, but
Hmm.
mentally, we have the choice to keep growing and keep unfolding to ourselves. And I think that is a really important example for a leader to set.
Yeah. And in that growth to that point, when I talk about growing, it's not necessarily always adding more. Sometimes it's taking away. It's
Mm,
unlearning. It's relearning. It's looking at, oh, my habits as a spreadsheet leader. This is not optimal. Maybe there's a more efficient way. How can I unlearn this and relearn something more efficient? Right? It's not always adding. It's like unlearning. Sometimes it's minusing. Maybe I behave this way or I react this way. How do I get myself to stop reacting that way? right? But the point is, most of the time when we talk about self-development, people are thinking about this for their team or for somebody else, but it starts from you. And to my point of the more you invest in you, the better you be able to give. So most of the time, as humans, we're looking at other people. Like, oh, my manager needs to be better, or this person needs to be better, or my wife needs to be better, my husband needs to be better at this, my kids needs to be better at this. But it actually starts with us, which is quite powerful.
Absolutely. I love the idea of growth through taking things away, reduction, minimalizing. That's so important to remember because it can feel tempting to believe that if I'm going to be better, I have to do more, I have to be more. And that's not necessarily the case.
No?
It can be so much gentler than that. You don't have to have the weight of the whole world on your shoulders.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Growth is learning, relearning, and unlearning.
Oh, and I think that's such a powerful part of your message is the unlearning and relearning we have to do as leaders if we actually want to step into a people centric and ultimately really effective business. So I want to thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I think
Thank
it's
you.
left me with a lot to think about, and no doubt our listeners are going to feel the same way. So I appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Before we end the episode, we want to take just a moment to reflect with you, our exceptional listeners, about what Abby's story means to you. What model of leadership have you inherited? And how could you grow through subtraction? If today's show inspired you, tell us. Send an email or voice memo to hello@wednesdaywomen.org. Or keep the ripple going by giving us a review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Your ratings help us grow and inspire even more people. This podcast is brought to you by Wednesday Women, an organization dedicated to increasing the visibility of women executive leaders. Learn more at wednesdaywomen.org. Thank you to our executive producers, Melissa Moody and Leslie Greenwood. Again, I'm your host, Ashley Lobbs, hoping you'll keep the ripple going. Until next time.